For PokerGaming.com, this is James Gwill. The first event of the 2010 World Series of Poker was the $500 Casino Employees event. If you are an employee of any casino or any gaming establishment in the United States or even the world, you are eligible for this event. The event kicked off with 722 players that were looking to take this first bracelet of the 2010 WSOP, and 73 players would ultimately make the money in the event. Several people that were notable players in this event were Jack McClellan, who is a well-known and legendary tournament director, Matt Savage, who is a tournament extraordinaire and has been featured on many television shows, including the World Poker Tour and other programs. The defending champ, Andrew Cohen, was also in the field, as well as former PokerNews.com employee Anthony Yeh. He actually was at the final table of the last WSOP circuit main event coming into the World Series of Poker. The defending champion was one of the early people that were eliminated in day one. He was crippled after a player caught a straight on him, and then later he was all in versus Ace-Queen holding Ace-King. While he was ahead, the flop more or less crushed him as it failed Queen, Queen, Queen to give his opponent quad queens. As a result, there was a new champion. The bubble burst on day one, and unfortunately Dan Miller was the bubble boy of the event. He was all in after flopping a set of kings. However, his opponent held pocket aces and proceeded to spike an ace on the river to take the hand and knock him out. Therefore, the other 73 players were in the money. The first day of play was led by Kent Washington. He finished with 168,300 in chips. Jonathan Catula was right behind him with over 108,000, and Jack McClellan actually finished in the money with the rest of the field. However, he only had 17,900 in chips. Day two saw the players play to both the final table and the money. Jack McClellan actually made a very deep run in this event. However, he ended up finishing in 19th place after his Ace-King of Hearts ran into the pocket jacks of Aaron Zurendorfer. McClellan made a strong showing this year, and as a result, like I said, finished in 19th place. The final 10 players all consisted of the final table. However, only 9 of those would actually be at the official final table. Jonathan Catula ended up being the final table bubble boy. He was all in pre-flop with pocket queens and ended up receiving a call from Anthony Vea, who had Ace-King of clubs. The flop quickly gave Catula the lead after it produced an ace, and Catula needed a queen in order to win. However, the board proceeded to produce blanks, and he was out in 10th place. Yuta Motoyama was our 9th place finisher in the event. He was all in with pocket aces and was primed to double up against Patrick Sylvie, who had king-queen. However, Sylvie ended up hitting a queen on the flop and then a king on the river in order to make kings up, and Yuta Motoyama, with his aces cracked, was out in 9th place. He received $5,434 for his strong finish. Jeffrey Bennett was out in 8th place. He actually was extremely short and moved all in with 7-5 of diamonds, and Patrick Sylvie made the call with the Ace-King of diamonds. No help came on the board, and Bennett was out in 8th place, receiving $6,969. David Villegas ended up finishing in 7th place. He ran pocket 8s into the pocket kings of Chris Reeder, and of course no help came for Villegas, and he was out in 7th, good for just over $9,000. Kent Washington, who was the day one chip leader, ended up finishing in 6th place. He was short stacked and moved all in with a king 10 and was called by a queen 7. However, a 7 on the flop put Washington behind, and he failed to hit a king or a 10, and he was out in 6th place for just over $11,800. Patrick Sylvie, although knocking out a couple players from the final table, ended up finishing in 5th place. He was down to about 150,000 in chips and moved in with the ace deuce. Arthur Vea ended up calling with pocket eights, and he immediately hit an 8 on the flop to make a set. However, the flop did come all diamonds, and Vea held the 2 of diamonds. So he got a little bit of, Sylvie held the deuce of diamonds, and therefore Vea had a little bit of a sweat. However, the board ended up not producing any further diamonds, and as a result, Sylvie was out in 5th place, good for $15,677. Matthew Hollinger was out in 4th place. He moved all in with a Jack-9, and Arthur Vea ended up calling the bet with an 8-6. A 6 on the flop, and then another on the turn, ended up giving Vea trip 6s, and that was enough to send Hollinger out in 4th place in order to collect $21,047. Chris Reeder was our 3rd place finisher. He also fell to Vea after he moved all in with pocket 8s, and Vea ended up calling him with pocket queens. Reeder ended up being knocked out by the turn, as Vea ended up catching trip queens on the turn, and as a result, Reeder was out in 3rd place, good for $28,655. Heads-up play was between Arthur Vea and Haoi Pham. It didn't take long before the heads-up match ended up producing a winner for this event. In the final hand, Pham raised 80,000 pre-flop and was called by Vea. On a flop of Queen 7-2, Pham moved all in, and Vea tanked for quite a bit before finally making a call and showing pocket 4s. Pham turned over pocket aces and had a crushing lead. Eventually, the board bricked out on both the turn and the river, and Haoi Pham is the 2010 World Series of Poker Employees Event Champion. Haoi Pham took home not only the bracelet, but $71,424. He was featured in the very first bracelet ceremony where he received the bracelet with his wife. The bracelet will also be engraved for him to commemorate his win, and he goes down in the history books as the first champion of the 2010 World Series of Poker. I will be back with more recaps of the further events in the 2010 World Series of Poker, so stay tuned to PokerGaming.com as I bring you recaps and coverage of the 2010 World Series of Poker.